Hello, and welcome to another installment of The Wizard Files, the special interview series where we go behind the scenes with the people who made Wizard Magazine and the comic book professionals who filled its pages. This time around, we are talking to a man who was there from the very beginning, contributing to the iconic covers of the first years of the Guide to Comics, who has also had a career providing vibrant colors to projects for Marvel Comics, many other publishers, as well as design work. We are so excited to welcome to the show Mark McNabb. How you doing?
How you doing, buddy? Hey, Adam. Well, actually, this is the only one I've ever done. I usually avoid the spotlight, conventions, and all that. So it's rare for me to do. And it's not that I'm any kind of humbug. It's just a hermit. It just I usually stay out of the limelight and I'm the guy behind the scenes.
Yeah, and you're a name that when we look at things like Wizard's big book of covers, here and things like that, we see this Mark McNab. Mark McNab. What is he all about? Why have we not heard the stories? So this is very special for us. So we appreciate you taking the time. But we do want to go back to the beginning here to understand, how did your journey as an artist begin, and did comic books play a part in setting you on that path?
Um, the answer is yes. I mean, yeah, like with any kid, I think it started with like Harvey Comics and Hot Stuff, Casper, Sad Sack. And then, my brother George, who 6 years older than me, he would leave his comics, what he was reading at the time, laying around. And lucky for me, they were Marvel comics because The Incredible Hulk was always my favorite. And so that was at that time, I started reading comics probably eight, nine, all the way to my teenage years, to where I didn't know if it was uncool or not, to be sitting around reading comics. I knew no one else that did. So, and back then too, to shock people, comics cost 15 to 20 cents a piece. So I got to go to the pharmacy that sold the comics about once a month, and I'd go in there with my allowance, and I'd have $4, and I would spend $20, 20 cents. That would be like 20 comics. I'd haul out, and my mom would just hate it. But for years, and I didn't know anything about collecting. I would save them, and then just put them away. But I purchased both DC and Marvel, and then I ended up going to college. And a buddy of mine, close friend, Greg Dennis, he he started reading comics when we were in college, and it gave me a chance to take another look at him. And at the time, he was buying Heavy Metal and Epic along with everything else. And I felt like comics grew up when I saw Epic magazine from Marvel and then Heavy Metal, and it caught my eye. And all this time during high school and all through college, I always drew and illustrated. But the thing was, it's my own pleasure. And I went to Ohio State University for college, and I went there to study science, environmental science. And then that was my undergraduate. And graduate school, I went for education. And after going through all this, I just never stopped drawing. I mean, I would be in a lab somewhere, and it was constantly just drawing. And I was just like, art was always like put down that you couldn't get a job in the Midwest. I'm in Ohio, and I always thought that you either had to go to California or New York. And in those days, that was about correct, because you had to go in and show people your stuff. There was no internet. There was nobody even knew what the internet was. And I decided, even after investing all the other time, that I was going to head off to the East Coast. I applied and got accepted at the Joe Kubert School of Cartooning. And so I went there, and throughout attending this school, I made a couple of close friends. I mean, a lot of friends, but two of the close friends that I hung with and did a lot of work with was Mark Pennington, who is an inker in the field, inked a lot of material from X-Men to Spawn to I think he was on a run with Death and the Sandman. But the other guy I met up with was Bart Sears. At the time, he was 18 years old. and I thought I was so much older because I was 22. But but uh, just getting out of high school and just getting out of college was a big difference. And but I tell you the truth, when you saw Bart's artwork, it was mind blowing even for back then. And so after that, graduated from Kubert School, went to an advertising studio, and then Joe Kubert called me up and said, "Listen, Mark, I'm reopening up a studio within the school here. I want you to oversee it." I'm like, "Well, that sounds pretty cool." And so I went off and worked with Joe for a couple of years, and that would take me about up to 87, 88. And Mark Pennington went off to work for Hasbro, and he also got Bart Sears a job there. So it was Bart and Mark Pennington working at Hasbro, and they came up with a job. It was called Cops, a line of toys, and they were working on the designs, but they wanted to try to affect what there's design concepts, and sooner or later toy packaging. And so they wanted some control over it, but they couldn't do it from the inside. So they had me as kind of a shell guy on the outside. They said, "Listen, we'll do a sample, and we'll send it in. We'll send you the black and white, and you go ahead and paint it up." I'm like, "All right." Let's send it in as a sample, and Hasbro liked it. So they said, "Okay, you go ahead and do we'll have you start doing the promotional design work that we show our staff." And so we started, and the guys would sit there and make out these 18 or 20-inch tall illustrations. They send it to me, and I'd sit down and paint them. And that went on, and everything was a success. And then Bart left Hasbro because the guys from DC who were they were starting a line of Cops comics. And they asked Bart, "Hey, would you be interested in this?" And Bart was like, "Yeah." So Bart went off to start to work on more comics. Um, in between that time, we hooked up with Sal Q Productions, not Sal Quartuccio, and Bob Keenan. And they put out a line of books from Judge Dredd, and they worked their way up to Conan also. But they would get reprints in from England and put on new covers, reformat them for the United States, put new covers on, and they would hire uh, Bart, Mark, and myself to do a lot of the covers. And no matter who did them, I ended up coloring their line of comics for a couple of years. And so that was that was a step into comic books at that time. Um, and then and it's funny, the SQ Productions, my buddy again, Greg, back in Ohio State. I had nothing to do with comic books at that time, and he says, "Hey, let's go to the Mid Ohio Con." I'm like, "What's that?" He goes, "It was the very first Mid Ohio Con. It was right downtown Columbus." I'm like, "Oh, sure, man, I'll go with you." And it was crowded, but it was really interesting with all the comics and toys around. And the guest person there was John Byrne, and I had no idea who John Byrne was, but um, my buddy was like, "I'm going to get his autograph. I have some X-Men comics here," and at that time, that was a big thing, and I had no idea. So I'm like, "Hey," I looked around. It was the Art of John Byrne's book, put out by SQ Productions. And so I went up and got him to sign it, and a little chit chat, but I didn't know what to ask for, and he probably found me annoying. But the reason I bring that up, um, one of the questions you proposed to me before was, what was one of my professional comic book pieces of work, and where did that come from? Well, I already mentioned Cops, and then I went down and mentioned um, SQ Productions. I Bart and I worked for a company called Innovation Comics, and they put out Hero Alliance. That was a book, Hero Alliance, and I have to go get reference from that
Yeah, that
sometime.
was like a role playing game, right? Sort of thing that tied into comic book characters. Is that
You
what?
know what? You could be right. All I knew is I was doing the covers, so I didn't really read too much into it.
Yeah,
And so, Bart was like, "Hey," and I'm like, "All right, man, I'll do this." And so you could be correct. I'm not sure, but at that time, I was just switching from. I left Joe Kubert, and it's funny when I left the studio I was in, or the big roomed areas. Andy and Adam Kubert took over my studio, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I used to go in there and go back in and bust on Andy and Adam because they had graduated like a year before me at Kubert School, and so we were a good acquaintance, and they were good guys. But back to what I was trying to do all along was always try to get a job with Marvel Comics. And I was lucky enough at the time too. I picked up a client called Comic Images, and I'll get back to them. And I worked with Comic Images for over 25 years. And they just a brief summary on them. They would produce merchandise for comic books and pop culture and fantasy artists of anything you can think of. They would put together buttons, stickers, T-shirts, and trading cards. And I'll swing back to that because um, at that time when I was working with them, I had to hire a couple guys to assist me, and that became McNabb Studios, and that was in 1989. And at that time, my assistants, I'll hit their names so they'll be happy with me. Sean Tiffany, artist that lives in Colorado now, still working away. Dan Eaker, Rob Kelly, Dan Eaker. I think he's still in Delaware and the surrounding area, and then Rob Kelly, and he's down in Florida, also working in the art field, still cranking out work. And I just want to mention one other guy. A couple years later, he joined on. It was Maury Hollowell, and he signs his artwork today. Mo with apostrophe, I think. But he today still works with Marvel Comics, does covers. I'm proud of these guys because these when they came to me, they're basically 18 to 20 years old, and it was their first job, and so it was kind of a training ground for them, and it was good. But getting back, me was always trying to climb to Marvel or DC. So I finally Marvel finally opened up to me, and um, advertising manager Fabian. Um, Please excuse me. Sorry, Fabian, I pronounced your name wrong. Nicaraz, or he's the co-creator of Deadpool.
yeah. We always struggle. Is it Nicieza? Is it Nicheza?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a hard one.
and that was the summer of 1989. And he goes, "Listen, I want to hire you. I got there's a comic book crossover starting up called Acts of Vengeance that's going to come out in the fall of 1989." And I said, "Oh, great." I said, "What is it?" He says, "It's a John Byrne poster and mobile dealing with the Avengers." So mobile was like little pieces of art with the logo just hanging, and then there was a poster. And I said, "What do I get?" He goes, "I'll just give you his pencils, and then you have to paint on top of it." I'm like, that's pretty weird because just a few years ago, I was just standing in line going, "Who's this guy?" So now I had a chance to show him what I could do, and so went at it and worked and painted right on top of John Byrne's pencils. And it was like 16 by 23-inch piece of art. And sure enough, they and also mobile along with an Avengers mobile. And I tell you the truth, I was so worried about making sure I got everything done. I brought Mark Pennington to help me with the mobile, and so we all made sure that was done. And I ended up driving out into Marvel. So nervous, I think I probably stayed up all night working on it, and submitted it, and that started my opening with Marvel.
That's awesome. I want
But
to ask you this real quick, Mark, just regarding because you've brought up that you were a painter. Did that feel unique at the time in the comic industry? I mean, like, Joe Jusko had been doing stuff for Marvel and things like that, but like, did you feel like, oh, well, I'm bringing something special because I'm painting my covers? It's not just standard coloring.
Yeah, that's what made me stand out. Um, I was not. I wish I was a painter like Joe Jusko. I've done some acrylic paintings, but my strength was really taking someone else's line art and putting more shape, definition, and lighting into it. It could be a two lighting or how many lightings you need on it, but I do backlighting. And so, yeah, it was standing out. And, all the way from Hasbro to I would paint things for Comic Images because they would get merchandise in. And I'd end up having to, let's say the trading cards, or let's say they would have, they would sell these miniature posters, and I would sit down and let me just show you something here. This is a piece from Cops, okay? And the reason why I show you this because it's what's called a photostat. And kids today, I don't think they know what a photostat is, but it's basically it's line art shot onto a semi matte piece of paper, and it's a paper that has two layers, and it's a shiny matte, and then there's this dull finish on the back. That's where I could take Dr. Martens, which were dyes, colored dyes, really vibrant dyes, and paint on it. The black and white line art would show through, and I'd have control with whatever molding or whatever I wanted to do with it. I could do it. And it was multicolored. And at the time, comic books were just flat colors or just a little bit of a tint. It was still primitive. It was still the type of painting that was from the beginning. And they were doing some stuff. I remember the death of Captain Marvel graphic novel. And I saw there that they were starting to try to um, use shading and blending. And I'm like, that's what I like. And then I saw Epic Magazine, and then I could actually see painting and I'd see watercolors. I'm like, that's what I like. And so I was never one of those flat guys. I needed to work on shape and definition and lighting. And so that Hasbro Cop stuff, 100%. Um, SQ Comics, Blue Line. Blue Line was something different. It was like an overlay of line art on top of a board, and you can lightly see the outlines of the line art. So I got to work my magic on that, and it took me right up through. Well, what we're here for is to start to talk about Wizard Comics.
I'm excited because, and it is kind of fascinating to me because when we talk to we've talked to Jimmy Palmiotti, for example. Like, you talk to somebody who's an inker, it's kind of an unsung talent, so essential to the comic book business. And you, like, as a colorist but a painter on top of that, there's so many elements mixed together. I am just curious in the most basic sense, because I know you've taught about this. I mean, there's so many details you could get into, but how would you describe to somebody saying, this is what a colorist adds to a comic book project, whether it's covers or interiors? Like, what are the elements that people may not understand about that job?
Well, whenever you get someone else's artwork in, you got to respect it as full as you can because they may have spent hours and hours on it. So you've got to give it the greatest respect. So whenever I get line art in, and that's what I call it, black and white line art. Example being like black and white line art. Um, you should know the story, read the story, so you know if it's night or day, inside, outside, and so everything you do supports the artist line art. You support the story, you support and support the narrative that's going on a page, and that could go for either the cover or the interior pages. Then you ask yourself, what is the mood? Is the scene about happiness? So will it be bright colors, or is it about gloom and doom, neutral colors, and sadness? There's a focus of attention usually on every page, and especially on the covers. There's always a focus of attention. But and on a page, you can also have a focus of attention. And then you try to use that to guide the reader's eye. And let's say if it's a cover and you want them to look right at the guy's head or the woman's head, you make sure that's where the most contrast is. Maybe there's a bright light behind them and the figure's dark, or maybe it's a darker figure or a lighter figure against a dark background. But you try to show the most contrast in certain areas where you want people to look. If there was just a spotlight on me here, you couldn't see the background that much. And sometimes that's what it takes. And the same, applies to the interior. So also in pictures, there's a foreground, there's a middle ground, and then there's a background. And it's your job with, well, now today it's a lot easier, but to either play down the line art in the background. Let's say it's mountains. Let's turn the line art to something similar to whatever the sky, the mountain is. So the figure in the foreground with the line art itself sticks out. You could add smoke. You could add, anything at all to help separate foreground, middle ground, background. And, that's our job. That's how I see it. We're lighting the set. We're adding mood. And a bad colorist can ruin it. And a good colorist can make it better. And so it's always my job, I see, is to make the artwork better. So, and I tell you the truth, that if you ever look at Wizard, I'll get into that, but
Yeah.
it you'll see that the covers were getting better and better and better. And that happens with anybody over time, you hope. If you're an artist, as time goes on, you get better, better, and better. But
Yeah.
okay, I'll let you ask me the next question.
Sure, sure. So yeah, we definitely we appreciate you giving us the entree into Wizard, because that is what we're so excited to hear about your involvement there. But the catalyst, you might say, for Wizard was that explosion in the early 90s
Yeah,
of comic books as collectibles. Just there was an excitement in the air. Obviously, you say you're doing work for Marvel, and it was starting at Marvel with Todd McFarlane and his Spider-Man #1 and things like that, and Jim Lee with X-Men and all those things like just converging. So Wizard is there to report on it, but also it was leading to this explosion of new companies and so much, in the world of comics that was, the doors seemed opened to anybody that wanted to try it. So I'm just curious, before we get into Wizard itself, what was your thought about that period, just about the boom and the opportunities that were available?
I I felt like I was the luckiest age group at the time to be in comics, and the reason why I felt this way, you know, as a kid, you're reading comics, and like I said before, back in the '70s, I didn't know if I was childish because I loved comics because I never had anyone to talk to about it. It's always carried this feeling about, is this really socially acceptable? And even though I bought comics and read them, I still had no one to talk to except when I came to Joe Kubert School and like, oh great, there's a school full of nerds just like me. But it was a trip. I was coming back from Marvel offices. I must have dropped off something, or I figured out the good way to get in good with the editors was to try to go there on Friday and then go in about lunchtime, and because they usually invited you out to lunch. And if you went out to lunch, sometimes it would turn into a liquid lunch, and they wouldn't go back. And so you got to hang out, have some beers with him, laugh, and they could see that, hey, this guy's okay. And but I remember one of those lunches, I was heading back across Times Square, going over to Port Authority to jump in my car and head out. And I in Times Square, there's this giant Coca-Cola sign that was there forever, and I'm guessing it's still there, but I don't know. I can't remember. But I remember looking up, and when I looked up, and right below the Coca-Cola sign was a big Batman symbol, just like what was on your hat right there.
Yeah.
And chills just ran through my body. And I felt, I mean, things were going well in the '80s with black and white comics. It was, there was interest growing, growing, growing. But we're right on the cusp of a Batman movie that was going to be released probably in a month or so. And there was so much complaint about who they picked as the lead actor, and on and on. And it was being directed by the director who did Pee Wee's Big Adventure, and it was just like, wow, what's this going to be like? Um, but it turned out I felt that was a catalyst that helped push comics, and that was '89. That was the summer of '89, and then comics became serious. People, that movie was a blockbuster. Prince did the soundtrack. And I was just like, it was, everything was just punching at once. And it was like, I'm really proud to be in comic books right now. And I was real lucky because I was working both sides of the industry. I was doing comic books or doing some comic books, but I was creating merchandise. So I was dealing with corporate Marvel, and then I'd go up and hang with the editors on a Friday and have a good time. So I felt like I had a foot on each side, and it was good to be where I was. And like I said, comics were taking off. I got to give a shout out the producer of the Batman movie who brought it to life. I think it took him like 10 years to finally start start to get it filmed. It was Michael Uslan,
Yeah.
and and the reason why I bring up his name, it was about 10 years later I got to work with him because he was putting a book together, The Boy Who Loved Batman,
Yeah.
and I got to hang out with him for a couple of days around New York City, taking photographs of stuff, and so they would be in his book. So, you know, again, here I was crossing Times Square. There's the movie, and boom, in the future, I get to hang out with the guy who's responsible for it, and I'm like, this is such, a cool career.
That is awesome. I have that book. I didn't know you were helping contribute to that as well. That's
Oh
awesome.
yeah, if you look way in the back and a little credit, you'll see, photography by Mark McNabb. But it's just one of those things. And again, I was very lucky, and but that's where the wave was coming in. Again, with comic images, merchandise was the sales were going up and up and up and up. There we have Jim Lee, we have Tom McFarlane, we have Rob Liefeld. These guys all at Marvel, and they're doing things, and things are just like, you know, uh, the comic book sales were going up and up and up. And it was making these guys superstars. And so it was just like, wow, this is the best career ever. And then I get a phone call, and I'll let you. You can ask me how I got involved with Wizard. That's up to you, but that's where I got a phone call.
Yeah, I mean, this is the perfect segue here. And just so everybody understands, your involvement here, you're going to break it down for us, but you are literally there from issue one. You are painting that iconic Todd McFarlane cover, but also there are trading cards that are now going to come in the magazine. There are promotional posters, all these things for the first 30 plus issues. And I say plus because there were also a lot of unpublished covers that
Yeah,
you and Bart Sears worked on together as well. But yes, tell us about this fateful phone call and how you got pulled into the world of Wizard.
I when did it come out? It came out in '91, I think. So here I was, and it was one of these days where I put in 10 to 12 hours already. And I just remember the phone call because it was getting dark. And the guys that were working with me, they went home, and I'm like, cool. So I was sitting there doing whatever, probably planning for the next day and getting stuff ready. And a phone call comes up, and I'm like, oh, all right. And he'll probably kill me for this. But there's this high pitched voice comes on, like, hey. And I'm not making fun of you, Garrett, but just he was 21 years old. He just got out of college. And he goes, hey, I'm supposed to talk to you. I'm like, yeah, okay. And he goes, Comic Images said I should talk to. And I'm like, oh, now I got to listen because they were definitely my bread and butter. So whatever they recommended, tell me what you need. I'm starting up a magazine. All right. And he goes, I got the first piece of art for the cover, and I need someone to add color to it and, paint it up. I'm like, all right. I said, I'm the right guy for that. And I said, send it to me. Let me see what I can do. I didn't think anything about it. I'm like, I'll do this job and do it the best I can, like I always try, and let's see where it goes. And he asked me too. When I got the cover, we talked more. I got the cover, and it's Spider-Man dressed up in a wizard hat, wizard cloak. Now working with merchandise, I'm looking at this going, I don't think Marvel will approve this because Marvel won't let things go out made. You can't put a clown costume on Spider-Man and print it. They're not going to accept that. And I'm looking at that, and it's only in pencils. So I know that I can't. I'm not going to paint it, and plus it had fixative sprayed on it. So I get this Todd McFarlane original piece, and I know Todd's artwork from the Incredible Hulk, and then he went off to do Spider Man, and he changed Spider Man forever. And so I'm like, this is great, but it says at the bottom, it's wishing someone happy birthday. It turned out to be Garrett's dad, and I'm thinking, is this like a fanboy piece of art that I'm supposed to deal with here? But again, so I talked to him and I said, listen, I said, this is just pencils. I said, this needs to be inked. And I said, I'm not an inker. And he's like, well, do you know any inkers? I'm like, yeah. I said, I know someone. I said, he's a professional. He's in the industry now, and that's Mark Pennington. I said, so I can hand it over to him, let me ink it? Yes. And I'm like, all right. So Mark got it and he inked it. Now, I bring up Mark's name and because I don't think Mark got any credit for inking that. I think everyone thought it was just Todd McFarlane inked it. And so I just a fun note there. Mark Pennington was the inker on that. So I get it back and I take my photo stat. I sit down and I go to town, coloring it and throwing some airbrush colors in the back. And I tell you today, I wish I airbrushed the entire Spider-Man. I think I hand painted it, so it came out a little flatter than I wanted. But I'm like, all right, this is good for Garib. And I said, and he loved it. I'm like, all right, cool. When I did talk to him again, he goes, listen, do you know anything about setting up magazines? And I said, he goes, would you possibly help me with that? And I'm like, well, I tell you right now, I think he lived towards Nyack, New York. And that was about an hour from me. And I said, I'm running my own studio here. And I said, if we had it in house, yeah, we could do it. But I said, you need to get a group of people around you, graphic designers and artists, that can help you put that together right next to where you live. I said, and I said that would be the best bet. He goes, okay, thanks. And so, I never heard anything else. And what he did, he was in a hurry to get that done and then put together a magazine for San Diego Con. And so all of a sudden in the mail somewhere along line, here comes the magazine and there's the cover and he has that San Diego Con punched in the front. And he called me up. He goes, hey, it was a hit. I'm like, it was. I said, I didn't know. I'm like, oh, good for you. Good for you, man. That's great. And he goes, yeah. He goes, I got another cover coming right to you. And it was Javier Sotaris. He's a ghostwriter artist. And he was hot at that moment, too. And I was making up T-shirts on Ghostwriter. And I remember I did a giant wall calendar using all his artwork that sold as a yearly calendar. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a good choice. But not one piece of artwork came in, but two. And I'm like, well, what'd you send me two for? He goes, well, we don't know which one we want to use yet. So I sat down, painted them both up, sent them in, and that's what Garrett does. He gets his artwork in, he picks which one he wants. And all right. And then, bang, here comes another one. Trying to think. It was Wolverine and Eric Larson. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I didn't realize it at the time. I'd get it like at what we considered the last minute, but I didn't realize what a difficult time for Garib was to get an artist. I mean, he would get some artwork, and usually he finally got an agreement by someone right at the last minute, and then it would come to me, FedEx, and he's like, "We got to hurry and do this. I got to get a printer like tomorrow or the following day." And I'm like, "All right, I'll push everything else aside and I'll get this done." And so that was the Wolverine And then it got on, and he asked me, he goes, listen, he goes, I'm running into a slow period here trying to find artists. Do you know any artists? I said, well, listen, I'll recommend my friend. I said, I think he's one of the greatest comic artists at the time, and that's Bart Sears. And, I think I said, listen, let me call him up. And I said, if he says, okay, I'll give him your number. Because I just, Bart's like, yeah, man, I'll do it. And I'm like, okay, cool. I said, he'll call you. He's like, all right. And so Bart did the first Batman cover. And, it came out dynamic. I'm like, looking, I'm like, oh, I love this. And Bart dug it too, because he got to draw Batman and got paid for it. And so we're on a roll. That was Bart's intro. And like I said at the time, it seemed like I would always get additional type of artwork, but Gareb was pretty good about marketing. And at times, he would ask me to start doing different color on variations, but the work never slowed down because all of a sudden he's like, "Here, I got this incredible Hulk piece of artwork, and it was by Sam Keith." That's like Sam Keith, and he goes, "But listen, there was a gray Hulk and a green Hulk." And he goes, I want you to paint the Hulk different colors. I'm like, what do you mean? Two separate pieces of art. I'm like, all right, I'll pay you for both. I'm like, sure. So that started alternative covers. He'd have Green Hawk on some, gray on other. And I'm like, all right. I said, I guess that helps your sales. One cover that stood out to me, not kissing his bottom, but Bart sent me, he goes, hey, I did a Venom piece. I'm going to send over to you. He goes, Gareb asked me if I do Venom. I'm like, all right, cool. I get the piece. I'm like, this is really good. And I said, now it's my job not to mess it up. And so I sat down and airbrushed, got on there and airbrushed it. And that was cover number 8. And I think when I think back, besides the first cover, within that generation of covers I did, that stood out just the way Bart drew it. And I was made sure I held back, not going crazy on anything. And it was seriously, I think Bart still gets, I think he has prints made of it and still sells it today because it stood out really well. And I remember, I think I read in Gareb's editorial, I think he said when he opened it up and he could smell the airbrush and the fixative I put on it when he opened up the thing. And he described what a delight and what a winner that cover was. And if you guys ever have a chance, go back and make sure you see Wizard cover number 8, because that was where it was.
Yeah, the combination of your art together with Bart, like just the dimension that you guys created with that cover is just beautiful. Like you say, it really just jumps out at you in a huge way. I'm so curious to, like, on the colorist side, one of the iconic things about, especially, those first few years of Wizard was the coloring of purple. They had this
Oh,
purple motif. I am curious, is there a specific name to that purple, or was there a mandate from Wizard about, like, this is going to be our color scheme, or did you guys contribute that? Like, how did that work?
well, that's a good question because without, again, could have been Gareb, but there was a branding was starting to form. And I don't know. I don't know if they listen. I guess from the first one, we thought of the purple cape and hat, and that seemed to work. And from then on, the cover usually had some element of a cape and or stars or a hat. So for a while, for the first years, I always remember a lot of that. I'm just looking at my notes here. He goes, by cover number 1, a shift in industry is about to happen. Oh, yes. By cover number 10, yeah, there's either a purple wizard hat, cape, or stars. And then there's a shift in the industry is about to happen around issue number 10. And that's where Gareb got Rob Liefeld to do a Cable cover. And it wasn't just Cable. Rob put on there his character Shaft. And I'm like, I got it. I'm like, all right. And there's stars on the background, but there was no, besides the stars in the background, there wasn't anything else with the Wizard. But the thing was, with the two characters, and again, me and on the corporate side of doing merchandise, I'm like, Marvel's not going to be happy about this. And at that time, too, this is where top talent was leaving Marvel to go off to film to form Image. And so Marvel had a bit of a rock in their shoe because they were losing their top talent. And at this same time, Rob Liefeld, he's a bit verbal about what was going on, and he was young and doing this cover when it came out. Marvel was really unhappy, and Gareb got a lot of gripes about it. And Gareb's thing was, let's do it. Then afterwards, I'll just say I'm sorry and I'll never do it again. And I'm like, all right. Because I did try to warn him some, and I'm like, hey, listen, I'm just telling you from my background. He goes, let's see what happens. And that sold a lot of covers and or a lot of issues. And so, it worked out. It worked out. It didn't. The popularity of the book was growing, and when something becomes so popular, either you get on the team with it, or you're going to be left behind. And I think Marvel and DC were starting to learn this, but the timing of Image Comics, which was becoming a force in the industry, was taking off. And before Jim Lee left, he relaunched the X-Men, and before Rob Liefeld left, he did was it New Mutants or X Force or
Uh-huh.
I can't, and it sold a lot of copies. So there was proof that a lot of copies of comics never before in the history of comic books, you could sell million plus. And so Gareb, through Todd McFarlane, he was friends first with Todd, and that's where he got that way back to issue number 1, because Todd was into sports and Gareb and sports cards, and Gareb's family was in sports card business and did a lot of business with Todd. And Todd, as a favor, did that first cover, but also that was a good way for Gareb to be introduced to all the other guys. I already did a cover with Eric Larson and did a cover with Rob Liefeld. Never did a cover with Jim Lee, but we'll see what happens here, because on cover 11, Gareb returned to Todd McFarlane to focus on the new release of Spawn. But when the art came in, there was a problem. Nothing reflected the Wizard brand. There was just Spawn standing there with his cape flowing, and it was a beautiful piece. And Todd just didn't have the time to go back and rework anything. He was, they put everything into Image, everything into their comic books because they didn't want to fail. So Gareth was lucky to get this, and he goes, what can we do? And I said, well, listen, I'll give it to me. I'll put stars on the background. I said, that's, stars. We just, Liefeld just did it the month before. He goes, okay. And, and then I re-photostated it, and boom. And I never touched the original art, all this stuff. And I think that's one thing the guys loved. I never touched their art. I photostated it and put it to the side and then returned it. And then, went ahead and painted all these stars that were shining through the background with Spawn right in the front. But finally, on issue 12, Gareb finally got Jim Lee. And it was Wildcats. Jim was a nice guy. I'd get the artwork, and it was used on a FedEx. It'd come in from California. But with the FedEx, there's always a phone number there. You got the address where it was. And Jim always wanted his artwork back. So it'd be a note in there. Hey, man, send it back to me. Here's my address. I'm like, yeah, no problem. Um, but I'd have to call him up and go, what are the colors of these guys? These are brand new characters. There would be some reference in there, and we'd go through it, and I'd sit down. I'm like, all right, make some notes. Usually, I take a photocopy and write down notes on it, and then sit down and airbrush it. And at the time, let me say that from all the Wizard covers, that's where my style was different from regular comic books because the regular comic books were still being printed flat colors. And so the covers of Wizard, it was a painting with line art, but it was full rendering detail. And the style I developed with those photostats allowed me to do that. So there was Wildcats. Then Gareth was smart. I think it was issue 13. He started bagging um, Wizard comics, and so the bag would hold the magazine and protect it, but it also allowed them to stick stuff in the bag. And that's where, again, I give Garrett or whoever thought of that marketing tool, he started putting in trading cards, collectible trading cards. And I know Spawn, they took the cover of Spawn and duplicated that. But then he started making some requests to people. Hey, besides the cover, can you do a card image? And we'd like to make a card out of it. And that, again, increased the sales. People would buy maybe a copy to keep the plastic on and a copy to open up and read. So that was good. The image guys turned to trust him. He would do interviews and they'd promote their book, and the Wizard fan base was growing and growing and growing. They knew it. They could see it. The improvements of the interior pages, the change of paper, the colors. I think when it first started off, I think it was black and white on the inside, or
Yeah.
maybe one color. And but then it kept improving. He kept putting money back into the book. The variation of covers, the sales. So it was a big snowball rolling. It was great. My end never changed. Usually I'd get in, FedEx package with a note, please get this out as soon as possible. The printer is waiting. All right. And then, but, and I say, when I bring up Image, there was a symbiotic relationship between the guys from Image and Wizard Magazine that they helped each other so much because the guys were popular, their artwork was popular. And when they did finally, come out with their books, there's Young Blood, then it was Wildcats. Each one was just like breaking records. And it was just like, wow, great. And so it was a train, it was going on and on. But not to leave two things too far behind, issue 14, he reached back to Marvel. He did the Women of X-Men. And that was, again, excuse my pronunciation, Art Thibert or Art Thibert, if you say it more in French. It's a nice cover. But then after that, in 15, Gareb started doing something that hadn't been done before. It was a gatefold cover. And he introduced gatefold cover. It was featuring Wetworks from Willis Portacio. He's part of the Image guys. And I wasn't sure what was going on with Willis. I read something where he's having some family medical issues, and he wasn't putting out his book as quickly as the other guys. But it was like, hey, send us something. We'll put it on the cover. And what he sent was like beautiful character sketches of all the Wetwork characters. And I think there's like 6 of them. I might be wrong, so don't judge me on that. But it was all separate art. It was all separate characters. And Garrett's like, what are we going to do? I said, well, it has nothing on Wizard about it. I said, let's again go back to the old stars in the background. And I said, I'll set them all up as if it was, lined right across. And that was the first gatefold cover. Going on issue 16. Again, that broke tradition. Wizard branding was not on it anywhere. and it was a fold out group cover, and the cover was made up of four different image characters and the four different artists that drew them. And it was funny with this because Garb was putting out posters for stores. And so, he'd want to get the poster out first ahead of the book. And so I'd get artwork and he'd be like, "Hey, let's get this done. I got to print out posters. I want to get it ahead, increase the sales of the magazine." I'm like, "All right." But with this fold out, I get he's like, "I'm going to send you the artwork." I'm like, "All right." So I get the artwork and it's only half done, meaning that the first two characters are done. And there's nothing on that back half of where the fold was supposed to happen. I'm like, "What do you want me to do with this?" He goes, "Do your magic, take your photostat, blow that up, and paint that. And that's what I'll use as a poster." I'm like, "You got it." And he goes, "Send me back the board because I need to send it to the other two artists." And on the front the two characters that the poster is made from was the Max and that was Sam Keith, and then Del Keon, who was great, incredible Hulk artist. He did the pit. So the Max and the pit, and that turned into a poster. And that was one separate piece of art. And no one asked for that back. So for some reason, I don't know how I ended up back with it, but that's the only color piece I ever got back or returned to me. And I had that for the longest time and finally sold it to somebody who wanted a piece of Wizard. But then I finally got the other half in. There it was. It looked great. And I restatted that and airbrushed that up and out it went. And I thought it turned out pretty good. And but like I said, there's no Wizard branding on that. And so after I just said about branding, then that went out the window.
Yeah, it definitely it felt like at that point it started to fade a little bit to just be like dynamic covers. We don't need to
Yeah.
stick with the wizard ideas so much. And a lot of those, yeah, like you say, were image covers and they were the hot artists, and that was enough to sell it and keep people excited. I am curious though, with all your work on the covers, getting people's attention, making them want to pick up the magazine, were you actually reading Wizard, and like what were you thinking about their style of editorial? And then, as you saw their influence grow in the industry, did you get on board with that? What was your thought process?
No, I thought it was great. Listen, it's not easy to put something like that together. And I was their staff got better and better. Um, the interviews, I think I always read the interviews because I wanted to know what was coming out next. Because on the other side, again, um, I was responsible for steering Comic Images merchandise about what to pick, what would make good T-shirts, trading cards, whatever needed to be done in merchandise. And at times, I did get convince some of the guys to do work with Comic Images, and so it was important for me to help know what was going on. And I was reading comics at the time, and so everything was important to me. Uh, and then if I did speak to one of these guys, I better know what they're doing, so I don't look like a chump when I'm, "Hey, who's this?" After their comics already come out, I figured it'd be a little insultive. So it'd be easier to talk about, what do you want done on this, and so no, Wizard, very, very important. With these covers, he took with their marketing skills. Um, the center was a poster, which was great because the guys who worked for me years later on would come in and go, "Wow, that's what we'd have hanging on our wall was the posters, and you did them all." I said, "Yeah, up to that point, yeah, I did." And so no, Wizard was becoming very important. I know at times, in hindsight, people talked about they had too much influence. I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. They would have like the five favorite artists. I was always happy to see Bart Sears was in there. I'm like, "Oh, go Bart!" and or the Kubert brothers. Um, People I knew personally, I'd always get a kick out of seeing. And then, get to talk to the people and go, hey, what did you think about that? And they're like, well, that's nice, but all of us were just like working guys, just working, doing our best, and trying to make sure that um, our best work was out there.
Well, and speaking of which, you say that you kind of tend to be more behind the scenes. You're doing great work, but the work is maybe speaking for itself more. Did you feel like as Wizard is growing, their distribution is growing, it's getting out there to so many more people? Did people contact you? Was that leading to more comic book work or other unexpected projects from Wizard? Was there a direct line there, or were you already building that yourself with your reputation?
I I was it was very helpful because somewhere along the line here, after issue 29, I didn't work with Wizard anymore, and but that opened up the time because there's so much time in a day. And when I was working with Wizard, you never knew what was coming in. But um, it did open the doors for me more at Marvel because I slacked off doing Marvel work because I just didn't have the time. And it reopened the doors for me. But it was after I went from airbrushing comic book covers to working on a computer. And that's what, in my eyes, I could be wrong because I never really asked why. But I stopped getting work from Wizard, and their covers, I would paint covers. If you look back to issue 25, the Wizard felt like I felt like this was a milestone. It was new, and they made it to issue 25. Jim Lee was doing character Deathblow, and again there was a poster, and it was a big long poster, and it was a character Deathblow, and um, had to go and airbrush it up. And then after that, the cover came out, which was a big gatefold cover. I'm like, okay, great. I thought it turned out good. I don't know what Jim Lee thought, but I thought it turned out good.
Yeah, like there we go, right there. I mean,
show the very bottom corner. This is probably where Jim
oh
Lee hated me.
yeah,
And
let's see
the other
here.
corner, the other
Hold it
corner.
here. There it is.
You don't see Jim Lee's signature, but somehow
Yep.
mine stayed on there. I'm like, oh, I bet he's real happy about that.
Got that McNab there. So yeah, but that was so interesting to find that story
But
behind.
then after 26, did a two Spider-Man. It was a Hobgoblin and a Green Goblin. And then the next couple of covers, I could feel a change coming. Issue 27 featured a beautiful cover by Jim Lee. I did the airbrush colors. They did a big poster of it. I'm like, all right, good. But when the book came out, it was computer color, and it was somewhat flat. You know, they hired a computer artist who didn't have my skills of a painter, but was able to put together. It could have been through Image. It could have been one of the Image guys going, or even Jim Lee going. You know what? We got this guy in the studio does computer art, and that's what we like. So, and Garrett would always go, okay, and, as long as the artist was happy. So I did the poster, but like I said, it was kind of a shock to me when the cover came out. It wasn't my colors. And then I'm like, then they went on to a Simpson cover, and then another cover came in, and let's see, I'm trying to think what it was. Oh, it was Bart Sears. He did a Spawn. Um, Again, gatefold cover, and it was really, really beautiful. It was issue number 29. I did the airbrush colors, and again, it was somewhat flat computer colors. And again, I'm like, wow. And all of a sudden, communication dropped off. But what had happened, and I don't blame Garrett at all. I mean, by then he was layered in with many people between me and him, and it was just a change of the season, and it was a real eye opener for me that I knew that if I did not change my ways and get a computer, that I would be as extinct as the dinosaurs. And it was 1994, and I got my first computer, and luckily with all this stuff in my back pocket, I was able to go off to Marvel and start getting work with Marvel, which continued with another 10 years of work of working with Marvel. I was doing everything with Marvel, from everything from promotional work to the covers. At times, I was lucky enough to do, I don't know, 7, 8 covers a month, and then end up working on Spider-Man interiors, working with Michael Golden, working with Ralph Macchio, Mike Martz, who I still work with here and there. He's with Mad Cave Studios, or he was with Paper Cuts, then Mad Cave. So it gave me a lot of opportunities. So nothing, at the time I felt kind of bad, but it was nothing negative, or no negative words were said. And we just parted ways at that time. But it was years later, I got to see Garrett again. And I was working with CrossGen. Bart was down at CrossGen, Mark Pennington, it was at CrossGen. But I was doing freelance work. But there was this one book that I was working on. There was a group of us, and Joe Staten was doing he was from E-Man, and I got a kick of working with him, because when you get to work with someone that used to read the comics when you're a kid, it's always fun. But I remember CrossGen demanded that as a group, we all attend the Philadelphia WizardCon. So it was a Philly WizardCon. I can't remember what year it was. And I remember before one morning, before everyone got let in, we're sitting there getting ready to set up and sign. And all of a sudden, someone's walking towards me. I look up, and it's Garrett. He goes, "Hey." I'm like, "Hey, man, how you doing?" And we hadn't seen each other in a while. And he had a book in his hand, and it was that book you held up, the big covers. Yeah. He goes, "Hey, I wanted to give you this." He goes, "You're in it a lot." And I'm like, "Oh, really?" I said, "Okay, that's cool." So I just took it, and we talked about things, and we went back to that first cover. I said, think about it. It started with that phone call, and we're standing in the middle of the conventions. And at that time, they were buying conventions left and right. And I'm like, look where we're at now. All those magazines, all the other magazine companies. He goes, "I know, man. I can't believe it." I'm like, "This is crazy," And we had some nice things to say, and that was it. They opened the doors, everyone flooded in. It was over. But the last time I saw Garrett, besides when he talks on some podcast, we both had families, and it had to be about, let's see, 2005, something like that. I'm at the Bronx Zoo, and went at the wrong time, around Easter time, where everyone was on break. The Bronx Zoo was packed, and the kids are hungry, so we go over to wherever the food court is, get them something to eat. And their mom took them over to get something to eat, and I was just standing there. And it was like one of those scenes out of a movie where the whole crowd is moving by in a blur. But what sticks out is the one person across the way, it's not moving. And that caused me to look up, and I'm looking, and I'm like, oh. And I see him looking at me, and I know he's trying to go, "Is that him? Is that him?" And I'm like, "Hey, Garrett." Garrett and I run into each other at the crowded Bronx Zoo. And we laughed about that. We talked about our families, and that was the last time I saw him. And like I said, I see him on your podcast, or whenever, he's friends with me on Facebook. I was glad to see him. He got into some art, and I see the cards he's producing now, which is smart. Because I still do trading cards. I did Star Picks. I think that's the name of it. Is that the name of his
Yeah.
card? Star Picks, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm still doing trading cards. I did a series with Dynamite. I worked with Fabian's brother, who gave me my first Marvel job, to set that up. He works with Dynamite. I'm working on another set. In the middle of it, Rambo cards, and that's for, again, These are all specialty cards where they put them in boxes and sell them with a lot of money because it's a piece of a prop or it has the guy's signature, whatever person is, And so they really they're doing trading cards now much different than was way back then. It always amazes me. I'll throw it back to
Yeah, I
you,
was just
Courtney.
gonna say you've touched so many areas of just that of the comic book world, like you're saying, from the merchandise to the books themselves and all those things. Speaking of projects that you're working on right now, I just got my copies in the mail, but you're still with your buddy Bart Sears, and you have him design his Drawing Powerful Heroes books here. That his Kickstarter campaign that just he's starting to deliver those. I was like, hey, this is great, perfect timing. Um,
And I don't know. And besides those two, and I did. I came in, and again, he jumped in there and used DC artwork and Marvel artwork in some of the books, and to reprint them. I mean, he probably got a letter from Marvel and DC and said, "Hey, don't do that anymore." And so he goes, "That was originally set up by one of his work associates when he had his own studio." He's like, "Mark, can you help me out with this? Can you update the books?" I'm like, "Sure." And so, sure enough, I got to do that. And anytime we get to work together, and the good news about that is, he's now working on a third book that he wants to release probably by summer. But matters what other work gets piled on top of him, I'm going to design that entirely on my own. And that's one thing. I've designed books for like 20 years, and I've been lucky enough to work Neil Adams, Howard Chaykin. I'm trying to think, Frank Frazzetto. I've worked on Wally Wood books. Just there's a list that just goes on and on that I've worked on. Hildebrandt, Greg Hildebrandt, around the lake. Him and his wife, Jean Scirocco. They're my neighbors. They live on the same lake that I live on. He passed away uh, like November of last year. It just broke my heart. Did one book. I hope to do another one with her on Greg. If you ever go to my website, you can look at them all. Just the Romitas, that's someone else I'm very proud of. There's John Romita, who was my hero when I was growing up. His son, an excellent artist. I got to do a book on them. So it just goes on and on that I'm so lucky about. My friend Tim Jacobus, I'll drop names. Are you familiar with the Goosebump series?
sure.
Okay. Many kids would pick them up in Scholastic book fairs, and R.L. Stein wrote the stories. And the first 100 covers, there was only one artist, and that did all the covers. That was Tim Jacobus. And Dynamite was trying to put together a Goosebumps book, The Art of Goosebumps. And I called over there and I said, "Listen, because I had done books with him, I said, I hear you're doing this book. Let me work on it." "Oh, well, we're trying to do it in house and blah, 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 blah." I'm like, "I understand. Try to save money. But if you need help on it, let me know." And it went on for a couple of years. There's nothing about it. And, I asked him about it. He goes, "Yeah, I got a call, but, I'm not getting paid any money. I'm not going to go and kill myself over something I'm not getting paid for. This is through Scholastic."
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "All right." I said, "Well, let me call him back." I called him back, and um, they're like, "We can't get the artwork." I'm like, "You can't get the artwork?" I said, "Yeah, Scholastic just can't find it, locate it." I said, "I got all the artwork." And they're like, "What?" I said, "I have all the covers." And I said, "I'll tell you right now, I bet I can get access to the sketches, everything that led up to each cover." And I said, "Tell me if you want to pull me on board, this is your chance." And and I was talking to Juan there, and Juan was like, "All right, let me call you back." Call me back. He goes, "You're on." I'm like, "Excellent." I called Tim. I said, "You gonna let me have your files?" He goes, "Come and get them, but it's up to you." I'm like, "I will, man." So he's my friend. He's been my friend since we were 25 years old, and working on art together. And it was one of the greatest thrills of my life to put his art on one book. So he had something that he could handle, and the all the people who read those books originally, they're now 30 years old and 40 years old, and they're introducing their kids to it. And it was only like 3, 4 years ago. Tim said, "I think I'm going to try one of these comic conventions, see if anybody will come around, want my autograph or not." I'm like, "All right, cool." I said, "I think that's a good idea." And he had so many response. Whatever he had sold out, posters and prints. And he actually called me. I think it was Dragon Con. He like, "You got to help me. You got to go to my house. You got to pack up a whole bunch of posters and prints and send them down here for delivery tomorrow." Because he never understood how much this hung with people.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, so I was very lucky to I ended up co-writing the book too, because the young lady who wrote it did a nice job of like creating a nice um, narrative about the entire story about Goosebumps. But I had the individual stories, about, the sneakers that were worn. There was only one kind, and Tim tried to put them in, different covers. So it went on from that. And I'm going away from Wizard, but um, I remember when Wizard was really popular, and I'd go over there and I'm like, "Oh man, this seems to be taking off." He goes, "Yeah, the book series I'm working on seems to be taking off too. It's like it's bizarre." He goes, "I thought it was going to be 1 or 2 issues or 3 issues." He goes, "All of a sudden, after 6 issues, it's starting to like get a huge following in the schools." And like I said, that went on for 10 years for him. And Wizard, it went on for me for 2, 3 years, but it was, same thing. It was just this wave. So I brought it back to Wizard now. So
Which is perfect. Yeah, and we can wrap up here. I mean, like we could go in so many directions because your art and your abilities have been brought in on so many different projects. But I am just curious, as you reflect now on everything we've talked about here, even the things we haven't, your your experience in being part of that legacy of Wizard magazine and just what you saw it become. What do you feel ultimately about Wizard? How is the vibe that comes back at you when you look at all those years ago, and what people think about it? Do you still hear about it, from people when they find out you're involved?
well, usually nobody knows. It amazes me once in a while because I still have a website, McNabstudios.com. But people do hunt me out. They might find a name on a back of a trading card or a trading card box that says by McNab Studios, and they'll hunt it down. All of a sudden, I'll get trading cards in the mail. Could you sign these? If someone, again, in their late 30s or 40s, if you ask them about Wizard, they're like, "Oh yeah, yeah." It's immediate. Today people were like, "Who?" Young people. But it was a huge imprint, and I tell you the truth, Gareb came up with an idea, a niche of an idea. He brought it out at the right time. The market was going up and up. He built a relationship with, you know, some of the best artists of the time, and so it was just, it was a roller coaster that just kept climbing and climbing. And you just had to hang on to it because when it went over that hill, you were flying. And it was just it it impacted the time. It reflected what was going on in the comic book industry like it would never happen again. I was there years later when Marvel went bankrupt, and I'm like, am I going to get paid? And that was that, and then they bounced back and but Marvel Garrett's magazine was rising right up towards that. Probably reported on that too, and you know it was it was a four-leaf clover. I mean, it was really just one of those rare things, rare finds that hit the market at the right time, and I had someone behind the wheel that knew how to steer it. Because there were seeing Wizard magazine becoming successful, there were other magazines, including Marvel, who was trying to put out their own magazine to compete with Wizard. And there was like, I think there was Inside Comics. That was a fan magazine that came out. There were magazines trying to compete, and they didn't last very long. And it was just, it showed that something like that was not easy to put together. And listen, and Garib was a guy who, he put himself at the front as the big cheese, but he could take ribbing, and he was a good guy to be around. And it was just, and he knew how he learned how to run a company, which was great because again, either you have the smarts to do it or you don't. He had his family around him. I'm sure that was helpful. So it was right person, right time, um, in a market that was exploding, and he reflected it. He was kind of like the still photo of it.
Yeah.
So
Well, and again, I think it's just wonderful now that in a more, public forum that people can again attribute, a lot of those covers that meant a lot to them to your awesome painting and the
uh,
coloring and those elements of the design, like you're saying, that you added so much of that they're going to be able to recognize that now. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing these stories because it gives so much insight and just that extra dimension to our appreciation for what Wizard meant to all of us. So I am curious, just are there any other projects? We talked about a few of the things that are going on right now. Is there anything you want to point people to that they should keep an eye out for?
let's see. Over the weekend, I worked with Xenoscope Comics, but it wasn't about color. Uh, Sometimes I since I do so many different things in the industry, they had me put together a business plan of theirs, but it was basically like a full color magazine. They have a huge amount of horror properties, and they're shopping them out to film industry to have movies made.
Yeah.
So they hired me to put together promotional. It's 30-page booklet.
Yeah, my
Uh,
co-host is a huge fan, so we've interviewed all those guys. Yeah, he talked to Zetascope for sure.
and I constantly work still in color, um, coloring comic books for. It's a religious company. It's Kingstone Studios, and they print biblical comics that go around the world. And they also have another company called U.S. Comics, and it's all about historic events. And they pull in people from the industry to work on stuff. And I've been lucky enough coloring their comics for 10 years. So every time, I got I think two right now that's going on. One in the history department, one in their religious department. And so, like I said, still doing trading cards. I still put together books, packaging. That's a big thing because when I worked with Comic Images, that was a start. I did packaging for trading cards and gumball machines and banks and you name it. That we did it. So that gave me a background in packaging that continued to go on and on and on with any company you can possibly think of. But like I said, check the website. You'll see stuff go up new every once in a while. You'll see past color work. You'll see new color work along with anything that can be printed on paper. I'll do it. Well,
Uh,
thank you, Adam.
yeah, this was wonderful.